I've been driving trucks for a little over 19 years now. Started when I was 26, hauling produce out of the Central Valley in an old cab-over that shook your teeth loose, and I never really stopped after that. I've seen most of this country, from behind a windshield at 3 in the morning, the hours when the rest of the world is asleep, and the road belongs to men like me. And I want to be straight with you before we start, because I think you deserve that. I'm not a superstitious man. Never have been. I don't knock on wood. I don't carry a lucky anything. I don't believe in ghosts the way some people do. I believe in bad tires. I believe in tired drivers who push past their hours. I believe in black ice on a bridge deck at 4 in the morning. Those things are real. Those things kill people. And I've seen what they leave behind. But 19 years is a long time to be alone in the dark. And over that many miles you hear things. You sit across from a man at a fuel island at 2 in the morning. A man who's got no reason to lie to you, and every reason to keep his mouth shut. And he tells you something quiet over a paper cup of coffee. And it doesn't sit right. And you drive off. And you carry it with you for 1,000 miles, turning it over, trying to find the loose thread that makes it fall apart. And sometimes you never find it. I've collected a few of those over the years, the ones that never fell apart, the ones I couldn't explain away, no matter how hard I tried. And believe me, I tried, because I'm the kind of man who wants an explanation. I want to give some of those to you tonight, not to scare you. That's not what this is. I'm not going to jump out at you or dress any of it up. I'm just going to tell you what these people told me, plain, the way they told me, so that the next time you're out on some dark stretch with nothing but your own headlights and the sound of the engine, you'll know you're not the only one who's noticed that the road at night isn't quite the same road it is in the daylight. So, keep your coffee close. This first one I got from a man I knew pretty well, so I trust it more than most. His name was Ray. He ran flatbed out of Oklahoma, hauled steel and lumber and heavy equipment, the kind of loads that'll kill you if you get lazy about your straps. Solid guy. The kind you'd want next to you if your truck broke down in a bad spot. He coached his kids' little league team, never touched a drop on the road, went to church on the Sundays he was home. Ray was about the last man alive who'd sit there and invent something to spook you. He told me this one himself, in a booth at a Flying J outside Amarillo, and he wasn't smiling when he told it. Here's how it went. I was running a load of steel pipe up US 83 through the Texas Panhandle, headed north toward Garden City, Kansas. It was late, past 2 in the morning, and if you've never driven that stretch of 83 up there, I'll tell you, it's about as empty as anything in this country. No towns for long, long stretches. Just wheat on both sides, black as an ocean at night, and that road cutting dead straight through the middle of it. I'd been fighting sleep for the better part of an hour, and it was the bad kind, where your eyelids get heavy, and your head starts to nod, and you catch yourself, and don't even know how long your eyes were closed. I was doing all the little tricks, window down in the cold, radio up, talking to myself, slapping my own leg, anything to stay in it. And that's when I saw the man standing on the shoulder up ahead. He was maybe a quarter-mile out, caught right at the edge of my low beams, standing on the right side, just past the fog line. An older fella, from what I could make out, heavy work jacket, and he had one arm up, waving me down. Not frantic, not waving both arms like a man whose life depended on it, just slow and steady, back and forth, like a man who wanted me to stop, but wasn't in a panic about it, calm. And I'll tell you, I don't stop on empty roads at 2 in the morning for strangers. Nobody who's done this job a while does. That's how drivers get robbed, or worse. But there was something about the way he stood there, so easy and so certain, that made me lift off the fuel without even deciding to. As I got closer, his face came up plain in my headlights. Grey moustache, deep lines cut around his eyes, the kind you get from a life outdoors. And he was looking dead at me, right through the windshield, and his mouth was moving. I couldn't hear a word of it over the engine, but I read it right off his lips, clear as print. He said, "Slow down." Just that. Slow down. And then he lifted his other arm and pointed straight up the road, north, the way I was headed. I rolled past him. I was loaded heavy with steel, and there was no stopping that quick, even if I wanted to. And I looked hard into my west mirror to catch him again, to see what he'd do, and the shoulder was empty. No man, no nothing. Just my own running lights washing over the wheat. And my stomach dropped right down into my boots, because I want you to understand, there was nowhere for a man to go out there. No car parked on the shoulder. No pickup, nothing. No ditch deep enough to duck into. No fence, no field road. Just flat open ground for a mile in every direction. And a man doesn't just step off the edge of the world in the 2 seconds it takes you to check a mirror. But I did what he told me. To this day, I can't tell you why. I brought that rig down to about 40, and I held it there, and I sat up straight and put both hands on the wheel, and I watched that road like my life was riding on it. And maybe 2 minutes later, right where the road dips down toward a little culvert crossing, my headlights caught something laid out across both lanes. Cattle. A whole line of black Angus, 20 head at least, standing right there in the middle of US 83. Must have pushed through a broke fence somewhere and wandered onto the road. And being black, they gave off nothing. No reflection, nothing, until you were right up on them. If I'd been running 70, like I had been all night, loaded down with steel pipe, I would have gone straight into the middle of that herd before I ever saw them. And loaded like that, at that speed, that's a rollover. That's the truck on its side, and the load through the cab. That's me dead on the road. There's no other way it goes. But I was doing 40, and I was watching, and I got stopped with room to spare. I sat there with my hazards clicking and my hands shaking on the wheel, while those cows just stood there and looked at me, chewing, dumb as posts, like I was the strange one. And I thought about that old man the whole rest of the way to Kansas. Now here's the piece of it that kept Ray up at night, and it's the reason he told me at all. About a month later, he's fueling in Liberal, Kansas, and he gets to talking with a local driver, older guy, who'd run that country his whole life. And Ray mentions the cattle on 83, tells it as a close call, and then almost as a joke, he mentions the old man in the work jacket who waved him down first. And the local goes quiet, real quiet, and he sets his coffee down, and he says, "Let me guess, grey moustache, work jacket." And Ray felt the hair come up on his arms, and he said, "Yeah, that's him. You know him?" And the local shakes his head slow and tells him. There was a rancher worked that exact stretch of 83 for 40 years. Lost his own boy on that road, years back. Kid came over that same dip one night and hit a strayed cow and rolled his pickup right there at the culvert, killed instantly. And after that, the old man made it his business to walk that road and fix every broke fence he came across, mile after mile, for the rest of his life, so it had never happened to anybody else. And then The local looks at Ray and says, "But he's been dead 6 years now. Heart gave out. Buried him in the spring. Ray never figured it out, and it wasn't for lack of trying. He looked into it, checked the dates, even found the old man's name once, though he never told me what it was, and every trip up 83 after that, he'd catch himself easing off the fuel at that dip out of pure habit, and he'd scan that shoulder for a man in a work jacket. He never saw him again, not once, but he told me the one thing that changed. He said he stopped calling it luck. That's all he'd say when I pressed him. He'd just shake his head and say, 'I don't call it luck anymore,' and go quiet. And knowing Ray, that was as close to admitting something as he ever came. That one stuck with me for years, and it's not even the strangest I've got. This next one came from a woman named Carla, and she told it to me across a table in a diner in Barstow, California, at 4 a.m, while we both waited on a delivery window. And she told it flat, no drama, like she was reading me a weather report, and that's exactly what made it crawl up my spine. Some people tell you a scary story, and you can hear them enjoying it. Carla told me hers like she was setting down a weight she'd been carrying too long. "I've been driving 12 years, she said, "mostly reefer, and I run the desert stretches more than anybody with sense would. I 40 across Arizona. I 15 up through the Mojave, all of it, in every season. And the desert at night is its own creature. Sound carries wrong out there. The air does something to it. And the CB after midnight gets strange. You get dead spots where nothing comes through for 100 miles, and then you get these long stretches where you're picking up voices from way, way off, echoes, conversations that shouldn't reach you. You learn to ignore most of it, or you'd go crazy. This was on I-40, eastbound, coming up out of Needles, headed toward Kingman. There's a long, grinding climb up out of the river valley there, and it was maybe 1 a.m, and I had the CB turned down low, just for the company of it. Mostly quiet. Every once in a while a driver would key up, call a mile marker, say something about the weather up ahead, the ordinary chatter that lets you know you're not alone out there. And then a voice came on that I hadn't heard all night. A younger-sounding man, calm, easy. He just said, "Evening," and I keyed back, "Evening," and we got to talking a little, the way you do, to keep each other awake on a bad climb. He asked me where I was headed. I told him Albuquerque. He asked what I was hauling. I said produce. Normal talk. And then he said, "You're the reefer with the busted marker light on the driver's side, aren't you?" And I leaned up and looked out and back along my trailer, and sure enough, my forward marker light on the driver's side had burned out sometime that night, and I hadn't even noticed. So I figured, all right, he's behind me. He can see my truck. No mystery there. And I said, "Yeah, that's me. Where you at? Back there." And he said, "No, I'm up ahead of you." And that stopped me, because if he was ahead of me on that climb, there's no way on earth he could see my driver's side markers from the front. But I let it go. The desert makes you loopy at that hour, and I wasn't going to argue geometry with a friendly voice. So we kept on talking. And here's where it turned. He started knowing things. He asked me, real casual, if my dispatcher's name was still Gary. And it was. I never told him that. He asked if I still parked at the Petro in Kingman when I came through. And I did, every single run. He asked about the little dog decal on my back window, and how'd my daughter's recital go. Little things. Personal things. Things a stranger keying a CB on a desert climb has absolutely no way of knowing about me. And every time I asked him, "Hey, how do you know that? Who is this?" he'd just give this soft little laugh and slide right past it onto something else. And then he said the thing. He said, "When you get to the top of this grade, don't take the pull-out on the right. The one with the historical marker sign. Whatever you do, just keep rolling." And I said, "Why? What's up there?" And there was this long pause, just static breathing on the line. And then he came back, and he said, "Because I stopped there once, and the CB went dead. Not off, I want to be clear. Dead. That heavy, dropped-out silence you get when a channel just closes down completely, like all the air left it. I called back for him. I keyed up 10, 12 times, said, come back, come back." Who was that? Nothing. Just that dead silence. And then slowly, the ordinary night chatter faded back in, like it had never stopped. And when I crested the top of that grade, there was a pull-out on the right, a brown historical marker sign standing at the head of it. And I have driven that road more times than I can count, in daylight and in dark, and I will swear to you on anything you like that I never once noticed that pull-out or that sign before that night. I did not stop. I put my foot down, and I rolled right on past it, and I don't have one good reason for you, except that a voice on the radio told me not to, and I listened. I looked it up later. Took me a while, but I found it. That pull-out is where they found a driver years back. Engine trouble, in the summer, in the heat. He walked off into the desert, trying to get a phone signal, and he never came back. They found the truck days later. "Young man," they said. And no, I never went looking for his name. I could have, but I decided I'd rather not know whether it matched the voice on my radio, because if it did, I don't think I could run that road anymore, and I've got bills same as anybody. Some things you're better off leaving a little blurry. That's what I've decided. I've thought about Carla every time my CB does something strange in the dark since then. This next fella now, he was the opposite of Carla. Where she'd tell you the whole thing straight through, this man could barely get 3 words out at a time. His name was Danny. Older guy, drove tanker, hauled fuel, quiet as a stone. I stood next to him in a fuel line in Ontario, California, for the better part of an hour and got maybe 4 sentences, but one of them turned into this, and it came out of him slow, like every word cost him something to say out loud. "I've hauled fuel 30 years, he said. "You don't do that job and stay careless. So understand right off, I'm a careful man, deliberate." This was up on US 395 in the Eastern Sierra, that long, lonesome run past Mono Lake and on up toward Bridgeport. It was deep winter, and it was late, and it was cold enough that night that the road was starting to glaze over in the low spots, that thin black shine you can't see until you feel the wheel go light. And I had a passenger with me, which I almost never do. A young mechanic named Tom that our shop was sending up to Reno on a job the next morning. Company cleared me to carry him. Good enough kid. Talked a mile a minute at first, all nervous energy. Then he ran out of steam and fell asleep against the passenger window, somewhere south of Lee Vining. Now understand, the cab was sealed up tight against that cold. Heater blowing, both doors locked. I lock them out of 30 years of habit, whether I've got a passenger or not. And I was giving the road everything I had, watching for that black ice, not thinking about much else. And somewhere up in that big open stretch out by the lake, where there's nothing but water on one side and mountain on the other, and no lights anywhere. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, and I glanced over, and Tom was awake, sitting up straight, staring dead ahead out the windshield, not at me, and he said, real quiet and flat, "You need to stop the truck." And I told him, "Son, I can't just stop on this ice. We'll slide. We're fine." And he said it again, same flat voice, no fear in it, nothing. "Stop the truck, please." And something in how he said it got into me. I can't explain it better than that. I brought her down slow and careful, no braking, just gearing her down easy, feeling for the road, and I found a wide gravel turnout and eased her onto it and set the brake. And I turned in my seat to ask the kid what in the world was the matter with him. And the seat was empty. Empty. Door still locked from the inside. Seatbelt still buckled, stretched across nothing at all. The kid was gone. I about came out of my skin. I grabbed my flashlight, and I was out that door, and I searched that whole turnout, both sides, up and down the shoulder, calling his name into the dark till I was hoarse. I got down on the frozen gravel and looked under the truck. Nothing. And here's the thing that I keep coming back to. There was a hard frost on the ground that night, and the only tracks in it, the only footprints anywhere in that turnout, were mine. There were no others. Not to the truck, not away from it, just mine. I finally climbed back up in that cab, shaking, and I got on the phone, 1 bar, and I called the shop to report that I'd lost a man off my truck somehow, that I didn't know how, and the night dispatcher picks up. And before I can even get a word out, he says, "Danny, oh thank God, we've been trying to reach you all evening." And I said, "What? What is it?" And he says, "That kid you were supposed to carry up, Tom. Listen, he never came in today. He rolled his own car on 395 this morning, coming into work. Hit the ice on the bridge deck. He didn't make it, Danny. We're all tore up about it. We forgot to call and tell you the trip was off. He'd been dead since that morning. He was never in my truck. He couldn't have been. But I'd stopped, right there on that turnout, because he told me to. And when I finally got myself together and pulled back out onto 395, maybe 100 yards up the road, my headlights hit it. The whole road gone to solid black ice across a bridge deck, edge to edge. The kind you never see until you're already sliding on it. And there in it, fresh, were skid marks running off hard into the guardrail from somebody who'd found that ice at speed that very same night. If I hadn't stopped when I did, I'd have come onto that bridge at 50 in a loaded tanker. I don't need to tell you how that ends. Danny didn't say anything else after that. He just finished topping off his tank, wound up his hose, and nodded at me and climbed up into his cab. That was the whole of it. But I noticed one thing as he pulled his door shut. Danny drove a tanker with 2 seats up front, and zip-tied to the passenger side, grab handle, there was a little wooden cross, worn smooth. I never asked him about it. By then, I figured I already knew. Now, not every one of these has a warning in it, or a body. Some of them are just wrong in a way you can't put your finger on, wrong in a way that doesn't save you or threaten you. It just sits there being impossible. This next one I got from a young driver named Marcus. First year on the road, still had that clean look about him that the miles hadn't worn off yet. He was genuinely rattled telling it, kept stopping and starting, and I believed every word precisely because you could see he wished the whole thing had never happened to him. I hadn't been driving long, he said, maybe 8 months, and I was running solo down through the piney woods of Mississippi. US 49, south of Hattiesburg, headed for the coast with a load of paper products. And I don't know if you've driven that country at night, but down there, the trees come right up to the edge of the road, walls of pine on both sides, tall and close, and your headlights just get swallowed whole. It's the darkest driving I've ever done anywhere. No ambient light, no towns, nothing bleeding in from the sides, just a tunnel of black with your two beams boring into it. And I was running a little behind, pushing to make my delivery window at the coast, watching my fuel drop lower than I liked. I came up on an exit I didn't recognize, and I've run 49 a fair amount, even in that first year. Just a little county road cut-off, no lights on it, an old faded green sign I couldn't half read. But my fuel was getting low, and my GPS showed a fuel stop right off that exit, half a mile, so I took the ramp, and the ramp went down into the trees, and it kept going a good deal longer than any ramp ought to, and then it fed me out onto a narrow two-lane that ran straight back into the woods, and my GPS still showed that fuel stop up ahead, half a mile, so I kept on. What else are you going to do? And then I came into a town. It just appeared out of the pines all at once. Maybe a dozen buildings, a little main street, a gas station with its lights on, an old diner, a couple of houses set back off the road, and there were people. I need you to understand that part, because that's the part I can't get past. There were people out, on the sidewalk, standing by the pumps at the station, sitting on a porch, and every single one of them, the second my headlights swung onto them, they stopped what they were doing and turned and watched me come. Not one of them waved, not one of them smiled. They just watched, turning their heads slow to follow me as I rolled down that street, every last one of them tracking me like I was the only thing moving in the world. I did not stop for fuel, and I couldn't tell you why, because I needed it bad. The station lights were on. There was a man standing right by the pumps, looking straight at me, ready to help, I guess. And I just could not make myself turn that wheel and pull in. Something in me flat refused, so I kept rolling, right out the far side of that town, and back into the pines, and about a mile up the road, dead-ended at a locked steel gate. So I had to find a spot to swing that rig around, which took some doing. And when I came back through that town the other way, it was dark, all of it, every light out, the station black, the diner black, every window in every house dark, and the people were still there, standing in the dark now, in the exact same spots, still turned toward me, watching me pass in the other direction. Nobody had moved an inch. In the 2 or 3 minutes it took me to reach that gate and turn around and come back, every light in that town had gone out, and not one single person had gone inside to bed. They just stood there in the black, watching me leave. I got back up onto 49, and I did not stop for fuel again until I hit a real pilot station down near Gulfport, and I coasted the last of it in on fumes. And I sat in that lit-up parking lot for a long time before I went in, and later I looked it up, that exit, that county road, that town, and there is no town there. The road's real. I found it on the map, and it dead ends at a wildlife management gate, just exactly like I found it. But there's no town on it, no buildings, nothing but pines. I dug up an old survey map that showed a settlement there, way back, but it was abandoned before I was born, and there hasn't been a building standing on still got it. I keep it folded up in my glove box, and I don't rightly know why. I've thought about throwing it out 100 times. I just can't do it. Marcus told me he never ran 49 at night again after that, if there was any way around it. He'd run it in the daylight, or he'd add the hours and go around. And he told me the worst part, the part that got to him more than anything. He went back through there once in broad daylight, on purpose, just to prove to himself he'd imagined it. And in the daylight, there is nothing there, just trees. And he said that was somehow worse than if the town had been sitting there empty, because at least an empty town would have meant something had been real. And I understood exactly what he meant. Now that next one is a short one, but it's the kind that changes how a man looks at his own mirrors for the rest of his life. A fella named Pete told me this at a scale house in Utah, while we both sat waiting out a DOT inspection. He was calm about the telling of it, matter of fact even. But I noticed he checked his mirror twice while he talked, quick little glances, and I don't believe he even knew he was doing it. I run doubles out of Salt Lake, he said, and this was out on I-80 westbound, across the salt flats. And if you've never driven that, I'll tell you, it's about as close to driving on the surface of the moon as you'll ever get on this earth. Dead flat, dead white, nothing for 80 miles in any direction, and at night there's no horizon at all out there. None. Your headlights don't hit a thing, no signs, no reflectors, no rise, nothing. Just black in every direction, and your own two beams reaching out into nothing. You can lose all sense of whether you're even moving out there. You'll swear you're standing still, and then a mile marker goes past you, and you realize you've been doing 65 the whole time. I had a driver on the CB that night. We were leapfrogging each other, passing back and forth every so often, keeping each other awake. Good guy, running maybe a mile back off my tail. And around 2 a.m, he keys up and he says, "Hey, you pick up a rider somewhere?" And I said, "No, why?" And he says, "Well, there's somebody standing up in your sleeper. I can see the shape of them through your back window whenever your interior light catches it." And I laughed at him and told him he was seeing things out there. It was my sleeper curtain, a jacket hung up, whatever. And he comes back, "No, man, I'm telling you, there is a person standing behind you in that cab. I can see them plain from here." Now my interior light was off. I hadn't touched it all night, so I figured I'd prove the man wrong. I reached up and flicked it on, and I looked up into my little sleeper mirror, the one mounted so you can see the bunk behind you without turning around. And there was a man standing back there, in my sleeper, out in the middle of the salt flats, 60 miles from anything, in a truck locked up tight and rolling at 65. Just for a second, I saw him, tall, dark, filling up the whole space between the top of the bunk and the roof of the cab. So tall, he was stooped under it. No face I could make out, just darkness where a face should be. And I whipped my head clean around to look straight back there with my own eyes, and there was nothing. Empty bunk. Curtain hanging still, nobody there at all. I keyed up that CB with my heart slamming, and I said, "He's gone. Whatever you saw is gone now." I looked, and there was this long pause, just the hiss of the channel, and then that other driver came back, and his voice was different now, low and slow and careful, and he said, "No, he's not. He's still standing there. I can still see him." And then, after a second, he said, "He's looking at me now," and that driver dropped off the channel, just gone, and I never raised him again the rest of that run. I called for him for the next hour, every mile marker. Come back, come back. What's your handle? Nothing. I never got his handle, never knew his name, never saw his truck pass me or fall back. He was just gone off the face of that salt like he'd never been there. And I ran the rest of those flats with every single light in that cab burning and my eyes locked dead ahead on the road, because I'd learned something I didn't want to know. The mirror was telling the truth, and my own two eyes were the ones lying to me. And I didn't want to sit there anymore, trying to figure out which one to trust. Pete still runs the salt flats. He has to. It's his route. It's his living. But he told me the one thing he changed. He took the sleeper mirror down, just unscrewed it and threw it in the toolbox. He said he'd rather not be able to see back there at all than catch something standing in that glass that isn't there when he turns around to look. And I've chewed on that a long time since. Sometimes the not seeing is the safer thing. Sometimes a man's better off blind to what's behind him. I've got one more for you tonight, and this is the one I hold the closest, because it didn't come to me from a stranger at a fuel island. It happened to a friend of mine. His name is Hector, and Hector doesn't scare. 22 years on the road, hauled through blizzards over Donna, broke down in country that would have killed a lesser man, and I never once saw him rattled by anything. This rattled him. He told it to me one time, only one time, years ago, and he's never brought it up since, and I've never made him. Out of respect, because I could see it still had its hooks in him. I was deadheading empty back through West Texas, he said. I-10, that long, dark run between Fort Stockton and El Paso. Must have been 3 a.m, empty trailer, so I was making decent time and half asleep with the boredom of it, because there is nothing out there. And out in the dead middle of that nothing, my power steering let go, just went, all at once. The pump gave out, and let me tell you, wrestling a rig by hand with no assist is a fight even running empty. It took everything I had to muscle her over onto the shoulder, without putting her in the ditch, and I got her stopped and shut her down. Middle of absolute nowhere. No town, no lights, no exit for miles either way. Mile marker somewhere up in the 200s. And my phone had one bar that came and went, like it was teasing me. I climbed down with my flashlight and popped the hood and stood there, looking at a dead power steering pump, knowing full well I was going to be parked right there till dawn at the earliest, and probably a good while past it, waiting on a road service truck that had cost me a fortune. And that's when I heard the engine. An old diesel, that deep, loose knock you don't hear much on new trucks, coming up behind me on the shoulder, and a truck pulls in and stops behind mine. An old cab over, the kind nobody runs anymore, looked like it had been working since before I was born, all faded paint and honest rust. And a man climbs down out of it, older fella, coveralls, wiping his hands on a red shop rag as he walks up. And before I say a word, he looks at my open hood and he says, "Power steering." Not a question. He just knew. And I said, "Yeah, how'd you figure that so quick?" And he didn't answer me. He just stepped up and looked at my engine with his own little light. And after a second, he said, "I can get you to El Paso. Hold on." And he went back to that old cab over and came back with a length of hose and a handful of fittings. And he did something down in there, bypassed something, rerouted it. I couldn't follow all of what he did, and I know my way around an engine. And he worked quiet and quick. No wasted motion. like a man who had done this exact thing 1,000 times in the dark, maybe 20 minutes. And then he stood up and wiped his hands and said, "That'll hold you to El Paso. Don't push her past 60, and you'll be fine." And I went to shake his hand, thank him. I even reached for my wallet, because a man deserves something for that. And he'd already turned his back and started walking to his truck. And I called out after him, "Hey, at least tell me your name. Who do I thank for this?" And he just raised one hand up over his shoulder without turning around, climbed up into that old cab over, and pulled out onto the highway. And his tail lights went up the road ahead of me, over a rise, and that was the last I saw of him. Now here's the two things about that night I have never been able to square, and I've had years to try. The first is the fix itself. That patch job held me all the way to El Paso, 60 miles an hour the whole way, ran clean and true. And when I limped into the shop that morning, and they put her up on the lift, the mechanic hollers at me and asks who worked on my truck out on the road. And I told him some old boy stopped and helped me on the shoulder of I-10. And he shakes his head and holds up the piece the old man had put on. And he says, "Whoever did this used a fitting they quit making decades ago." Says he hadn't laid eyes on one in years, wouldn't even know where you'd get one anymore. And he says, "Honest to God, the way this is rigged, it shouldn't have worked at all. Shouldn't have held 10 miles, but it held 100. And the second thing, when I pulled out onto I-10 behind that old man, I was following his tail lights up ahead of me, and I never passed him, and he never pulled off, and I never saw those tail lights again after they crossed that first rise. Now, that's 100 miles of dead straight open road with almost no exits between there and El Paso. I was doing my 60. He couldn't have been doing much more in that old rattletrap, and I never saw him again. Not parked at a rest area, not stopped for fuel, not ahead of me on a single one of those long, flat straightaways where you can see tail lights for 10 miles. He went over that one rise, and he was just gone, like the road swallowed him. Hector kept the fitting. When the shop put a new pump on, he had them save the piece the old man had rigged up, and to this day he keeps it out in his garage in an old coffee can up on a shelf. He showed it to me one time. Just an old brass fitting, greasy, nothing special to look at, the kind of thing you'd step right over on a shop floor. But he keeps it, and I asked him once why he holds on to that old piece of junk, and he was quiet a second, and then he said, "Because it's the only proof I've got that any of it ever happened." And then he put the lid back on the can and set it up on the shelf, and we didn't say another word about it. I've thought about every one of these more than I'd care to admit to you. Ray's man in the work jacket, waving him down slow on the panhandle. Carla's voice on the CB that knew her dispatcher's name. Danny and his passenger, who'd been dead since that same morning. That town down in the Mississippi pines that isn't there in the daylight, and the receipt in Marcus's glove box from a station that never existed. Pete's mirror out on the salt, telling the truth, his own eyes wouldn't. And Hector, and his old man in the cab over, who fixed a truck with a part nobody's made in 50 years, and then drove off a straight road into nothing. And I'll tell you where I've landed on all of it, which isn't far. I don't have an explanation for you. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I do, because that would be an insult to you and to me both. Every one of these people was a level-headed driver, with no reason on earth to lie to me, and every reason to keep it to themselves. And that's the thing. That's how I've always known which stories to trust. The ones who are making it up, they can't wait to tell you, They lean in, and they draw it out, and they watch your face to see if you're scared. The ones who actually lived through something, they can barely get it out of their mouths. They tell you once, in a low voice, and then they change the subject. Every single person in this episode was the second kind. Every one. Here's the only thing I know for dead certain after 19 years out here. The road in the daytime is just a road. It's a job. It's miles and diesel and coffee and getting the load there before the window closes. And there's nothing to it but the work. But somewhere out past midnight, out where the towns thin down to nothing, and the last lights disappear in your mirrors, and it's just you and the sound of the engine and 80 miles of black in front of you. That road turns into something else. I don't have a word for what it turns into. I've been chasing that word for 19 years, and I've never caught it. I just know it's different out there, and I know I've learned to pay attention. When something on that road tells me to slow down, I slow down now. I don't argue. When a voice on the CB, or a feeling in my gut, or a man standing where no man ought to be, tells me not to take an exit, I don't take it. I used to argue with it. I used to think I was too smart and too tired to listen to that kind of thing. I don't anymore. I've heard too many of these, from too many people who weren't the type to make things up, and somewhere along the way, I quietly stopped betting against it. So that's what I'll leave you with tonight. If you're out there right now, running some long, dark stretch of highway with this in your ears, and something you can't quite explain tells you to do something or not to, a feeling, a voice, a man on the shoulder waving you down slow, don't be too proud to listen to it. It might be nothing. Most nights, it probably is nothing. But out here, on the long haul, in the dark, probably isn't a word I'd bet my life on anymore. And I'd think twice before you bet yours. Drive safe, keep your eyes on your mirrors, and I'll see you down the road.